This is part 2 of our 3-part class here, talking about civilizations. We're coming more into we're coming into our hemisphere now. We're going to talk about the civilizations that we know about. Now, that's the interesting thing, is that some civilizations may have existed in places that haven't been discovered yet. You know, it's just they may be covered with, there may have been earthquakes, other kind of natural disasters that may have buried certain civilizations, and they may become evident. Like the Hittite civilization wasn't discovered until the 1820s by archaeologists, and one civilization they didn't really recognize until 1920s. And there might be something that you know about from countries that you're from, or other places that that you've heard from your parents or everything, and it might have very well been a great civilization. It's just that archaeologists haven't identified it as such. Now, this is a part of Central and Northern South America there, Mexico, and down in this area, Panama Canal is right around in here, and then this is Colombia, Venezuela, and Peru, and down into Chile here. Andes Mountains, very high mountain range, splits this country, and this area here is the Amazon River area, in this area up there. So along the coast here, there's some cultures that were developed. They have the word for this, cultural anthropologists have a word for this area called Mesoamerica. And Mayan history starts in this peninsula down in here, in this area around this joining part. This starts in 2600 BC. During the discoveries of Columbus and other Cortez and others of the Spanish and Portuguese travelers during the 1400s, 1500s, this area became Latinized, as they call it. That's why they call it Latin America. So the Spanish language came here. The Roman Catholic religion was introduced along this area. But the Mayan culture, their civilization, were really noted for just astronomy. They had they had a very good map of the sky and the stars, and a highly developed culture, especially a religious culture. Now, again, this is one of their gods that you can see. Again, sort of like a snake head there, I guess. Snake heads, claws, fangs, and I think that's that's maize in his hand there, corn, that kind of thing. So that's part of it. But here's one of them. The Mayan culture is one of them, and then the Chavin culture is another one. Chavin, Mayan, Mayan. I'll write that down for you. Oops, that's good, huh? Like that? Yeah. All right. Mayan, yeah, Mayan, and it's all right. I'm just learning how to write with this thing, Pastor Schaller gets to use it all the time. I know. I get 3 hours on Monday night, and it's really fun. Okay, so the Mayan culture, and then the Chavin culture. The Chavins people were more towards the Peru part here, upper Peru here, and the Mayans were up in this area. And but this is a Chavin. Again, the thing that I want to point out is these kind of architectural elements in this kind of coming through a gate and trying to make your way up to God. This is like, again, try to make your way. This is like a gate there, some sort of with a couple of pillars. And we'll see this in the Temple of Solomon and those kind of things. These pillar structures and everything, they are sort of part of every sort of Gothic cultural religious type of structures. Come through the great gates and work your way up. Now here's another one too. You can see, look, this is a Mayan. Look at the steps, classic Mayan kind of thing. So this is the bottom, and you just keep working your way up until you are close to God. Human effort. This is really the progress, and it's in every one of the civilizations we have seen so far, is that the essence of the religious life of the civilization is human effort. If you do well, you will not, you will be closer to God. Like the beginning of that, yeah, sure, life is suffering, but if you do well, life can become something other than suffering for you. So these kinds of structures, it's astonishing to me. The more that I do research for this class, it astonishes me that just every place these kind of structures seem to pop out and show themselves to be a part of like the religious life of that age there. So this is there's not really much to say about these civilizations. When the Spanish came in and the Portuguese came into this part of the world, their goal was really not to learn about the culture that was on the ground. It was to radically introduce the culture that they were bringing from the Western, to westernize, to bring civilization to this civilization. They didn't view this as civilization. Now, we had a conversation, Dinesh and I had a conversation during the break, that like how, aren't like cathedrals similar to this, right? Like the religious cathedrals that have been structured in the name of Christ, but in the name of religion, but, it's claiming to glorify Christ. We know a steeple, we sort of take comfort in a steeple, and it's sort of, we see a cross on the top of a steeple, and we sort of like, we witness it, and we have something to it. But, if you're driving along the Washington Beltway, you're astonished by the thing that looks like the Wizard of Oz's house. And it's the Mormon temple with the angel Gabriel blowing something on the top. And again, it is staggered the same way. It's like it's white, it's brushed marble, and it's staggered, and it's like it's saying the same thing. All of human religion that doesn't begin with the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of spiritual wisdom, any human wisdom, you leave that out, and you can use the little eightfold wheel that we saw from the Buddhist model there. And all of that seems very well and good, but that's, when you look at it, that's really the essence of all human religion. Let's just keep them from fearing the Lord, and then they can live in that. And I think it's interesting that one thing that looked like sort of like a steering wheel on the ship, that whole circle. Let's just get all of the people circling around, trying to circle their way up to heaven, and before you know it, they'll be in hell with us. That's really the demonic way, And that's the thing. The more when you study civilization, it's like this thing gets in, and it plants its roots deep, and that's really the thing when we think about the tree. Okay, you have the tree. Okay, we see that the tree, the knowledge of good. Is that a tree? Okay, come on, give me a chance. That's a tree. There we go. Okay, there. That's a tree, and then a little fruit there. Okay, that's a tree. And then you don't see. It's a sick tree, because that's the bad side of the tree of good and evil. That's the evil side of the tree. Okay, it's kind of interesting. Okay, so it's kind of, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is really where Adam and Eve went. Let's not listen to the voice of the Lord. Let's take this. And it's interesting that everyone is still fellowshipping at this tree and trying to work their way up into a better understanding of God. when God is saying, just hear me. Oh, earth, 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 hear. That was the declaration of Jeremiah. God saying through Jeremiah, oh, earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. That was the truth in the garden, and that's really what Satan is trying to confuse in all of these cultures. So that's going on in Latin America at the same time these other cultures are being developed from 2600. At the beginning, we talked about the 2600. From 2600 BC, these cultures are running sort of parallel. Parallel, that's the good thing. Horizontal. Everything is on a horizontal plane. It's not until Christ enters the picture that we have something lifted up and the ladder to God is there. That Christ is lifted up from the earth and begins to draw all men unto him. Okay, so we will go now to another part of the world. We'll go to Africa. Okay? And in this part of the world, we have Egypt here. We'll get to that later in this section. We want to talk about other parts of this continent, though, first before we get into Egypt, because Egypt sets us up really for what's going to be happening to the people of Israel. And we'll conclude with the people of God again tonight in the last part. So the African continent is, this is the northern part of it, and this is what we'll deal with primarily. We don't know so much about what was happening in the southern part. It could be that something will be discovered there, but we do know in this area of Nigeria and over in this area, Ghana, over in this area, there were certain civilization and empires that were operating in this area. People came down here, maybe shifted over here. The Sahara Desert that dominates this part of the continent up here was actually, far less expansive than it is now. It wasn't always a dry and terrible place. Right now, this area is the primary fertile area, or was anyway. But we know that Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, which is right here, all these areas are under a massive amount of famine. But there's the Lake Victoria is still here, and Victoria Falls is still there, and everything flows down, and the river still exists there in the Nile. So, but we want to talk about this part. This part of Africa first before we get into the Egyptian part. Now, this is interesting. You maybe can't see it so much, but really in this part of the earth is a great rift. It's like something cataclysmic happened to the earth's crust, and it splits, and really the water filled in to make the Red Sea in this area, and then there are large lakes here in Africa itself. Here, Lake Victoria being one of them, and it stretches pretty much this rift, this deep rift kind of valley stretches almost all the way down to Tanzania and Zambia to the south. And so this is the Great Rift Valley, it's called, in the Earth's surface. It's about a 4,000-mile rift here. And it's not so readily apparent here for us, but we would, if you were to look at it, you would see sort of the way the earth dips in that area. Right here in this is the Dead Sea. That's the lowest point on the planet right there. So that rift comes down that way. Okay? So the Nile, the Niger, the Congo, these rivers are all a part of, again, the Niger is here over on this part. So you have civilizations that are developing along this river. And, you have certain civilizations down here around the Ethiopia and Sudan. These places are and Libya. These places are biblically mentioned. We know them from the Bible for us. So the Sahara, Libya, in the Bible we notice things called F-P-H-U-T, or Put. This is Libya. This is in, these are descendants of Ham's sons. Ham. This is a descendant of Ham that was here, that managed to migrate from Asia over here. Another nation that we'll know here is the land of Cush. Cush. Come on, work for me. Cush. This is probably the Sudan. This area is Cush. Sudan, Ethiopia. Sudan is known as the Cushites. There's one king, a 1,000,000-man army, kind of ironic, but a 1,000,000-man army was made up of Ethiopians, and they were defeated during one battle. They came up here to try and take over this territory, and they were defeated. They were defeated by it. They didn't make it. They were defeated. They were confused by God, and they didn't manage to take over the territory of Israel. So we have that, Cush, and Sabaeans or Ethiopians. So these are all, pen is sort of going a little strange on me there. Okay, so we have this happening in this part of Africa. At some point, these cultures, these cultures, the Sudanese area, Cush, and this area managed to gain great influence in Egypt, and actually conquered most of the lower kingdom of Egypt. And for a season, they were the dominant era there. And then the Assyrians helped drive this group of Cushites back into their territory. So that's just part of their that civilization that happened there. The Egyptians traded extensively in these territories. The Egyptians and all of these territories were really related to each other based on the river and the Red Sea and the flow of traffic here, and then the trade that was happening in all of these areas. So, stable societies with, again, the same kind of, ironwork, bronze work, same kind of, not as many houses, primarily because this is the equator. Here, pretty close to the equator right here. And that makes this area, extremely jungle, so trying to develop the kind of housing and the bricks that are developed up in this area and in these areas with the kind of mud and straw that you could have to form the kind of brick houses that were in existence over here was much more difficult in these territories. We know that it happened up in Egypt. The bricks for the great pyramids and those things were used there. But in these areas, the architecture is not so defined for us, except that in, this is the kind of there. Okay, except here, these are sort of, again, we have these structures. There it is. You see the base. Let's get a little bit taller, and try and work our way. This looks more like the thing in China, right? Okay, sort of like the China. This is Nigerian pyramids. These are in Nigeria. So in the western part of Africa, along the Niger River, these pyramid-like structures are there. So again, what kind of religion is existing there? We don't have like a world religion that's still, that has sprung from these African nations yet. Primarily because of Moses' influence in Egypt, and then also the Ethiopian eunuch that was saved in the story in the book of Acts, took back the truth of the gospel back to Ethiopia, to his queen, and Ethiopia became one of the first real Christian countries in Africa. And there are still old churches from that area that you can discover and find artifacts from in that territory near Egypt and Israel. So we know that happened. We know that an Ethiopian helped save Jeremiah from the pit that he was in. He was lowered into the well, and he was into mud up to his armpits, and an Ethiopian lowered the ropes to pull him out. It was an Ethiopian who was in the court of the king at that time. So that we don't have so much. We know that some of the religion was based on some of the tribal religions were animist and based on a lot of worshiping of the elements and everything. But that's true in all of the cultures. But in Nigeria, we do find this pyramid structure again that Satan seems to have influenced in many places around the world. So that's what's going on in Africa. We'll talk more about other things that happened in Africa because there's a great move of God that went on in many right after let's see, I think it was Matthias, who was the man of lots. Who's going to replace Judah as one of the 12, right? They cast lots, and he's the one. He died as a martyr in Africa, and we know that I think one other of the 12 also died witnessing in a part of Africa. So there was a great move that way. Thomas went towards India. We know what Paul did all across Asia Minor and everything like that. So it seems like the apostles and the early church were really interested in making sure that they were getting the gospel to as many places as they could. And they weren't, going in the same direction all the time. So that's a good thing for us to understand. So we have this there, but here we see this figure, this picture, work your way to God. It's back there for us to look at. So that's what's going on in Africa. There's also something. So now that brings us to the Egyptian culture. King Tut and all that. How about that? There you go. King culture. Now if you look, I don't know if maybe we can get a little closer in here. Let's just look. I just want to show something here. It's really important that you notice just this is an Egyptian structure, but you notice that this is a very African face. Can you see that? This is a very African face. So the idea of the Sudanese and the Ethiopian culture, influencing things farther up the Nile is not something that's just made up by somebody trying to, with some sort of agenda. This is real. The Sphinx, whoever was the model of the Sphinx, if this is a woman or a man, the features here are very, have something from, this isn't an Arabic face. This isn't an Arabic head. This is, what I'm saying? So that's, so this civilization, this great civilization was really an African civilization. It's an African civilization, not a Middle Eastern civilization. Although it's where East meets West is right there. It's starting to happen. So this is the Great Sphinx, and it's you can see it's the land of in the Bible. Egypt is known as the land of Ham. Mizraim is another name, one of Ham's sons. The land of Ham. And, whoa. Sorry, we'll get better. Land of Ham and Mizraim. This is one of the sons of Ham. And in Genesis 10:13, these were, they called their country Kemet primarily, and this word is an Egyptian word for black, but it's not really describing the people, it's really describing the earth. The earth, the kind of, We're having a good time now. Yeah, there you go. Okay, the earth. The kind of earth that was the dark earth that was really left behind by the flooding of the Nile River. So if we get a picture, let's see if we can get a picture of where are we here? Okay, so there's another picture of the pyramids. And there we see another picture of sort of the pharaoh. The other idea, these statues, they have some, if you look at the similarities of them, the cultural things attach themselves to it. But, okay, that's the Exodus. We don't want to get to that point. But Egypt is here in this north part, and this river, this Nile Delta, is it's just a very fertile area all the way down along this area, very fertile. Wheat, corn. We know that Joseph saved the Egyptian culture from extinction because of his management capabilities. So the empire of Egypt. Let's see, it began in maybe 2300 BC. 2300 BC is when the Egyptian really began to, extend its reach and make itself felt worldwide. The Hebrews began to live here in 1850 BC. That would have been when Jacob and his family went down there to meet up with Joseph, who had been sent on ahead by God and was sold by his brothers into slavery. So this little strip here really is only about 12 miles wide. It's not like a wide plain. About 12 miles wide of fertile territory, and great cities were the cities of Cairo is there now, but Memphis, Thebes, Luxor, these cities were located on the Nile. And the pharaohs began to rule almost immediately. There was two pharaohs, Lower Egypt, Upper Egypt, and then about, I would say about 1100, is that about right? Or 1500. 1500 is when they estimate when the Hebrews were released. That's the Exodus. So I would say 1700 would be a time when Israel was invaded. Egypt was invaded from the outside, and a new pharaoh from the lower part sort of united everything under one pharaoh. This might have been the pharaoh that did not know Joseph, who had saved the nation previously. So this territory was ruled by one ruler, one government, and they had a great. They developed a culture built around They had a culture built around the gods that they worshipped. They had a strong culture rooted in the river primarily. And most of the plagues that fell upon Egypt, were the direct result of God judging a particular idol that had exalted itself and that the Egyptians were worshiping beyond the God of heaven. God had saved their nation by sending a man. There was a witness there in Egypt. This witness was Joseph himself. And so the witness was forgotten. And so that witness being forgotten, opened them up to the circumstances. They would reap what they sowed there. So again, we have these structures, the pyramid kind of structures. Now they believed like in a strong a strong idea of an afterlife. So you know that they would prepare these tombs and prepare their leaders. The rich had these large tombs prepared for them, and most of their worldly goods would go into these tombs with them. These are really tomb structures. Inside here was, structures of places to store the worldly goods of those who were buried here. And that was the idea, that you could take it with you. That was the idea. You could take it with you. And you take as much of it with you when you go into the grave. We mummify your body and we take everything there, So they were humanistic, they were naturalistic, and they were polytheistic in their religious faith. They worshipped man, particularly the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh himself was a god, and they deified the forces of nature. The beetle, a scarab, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, a scarab, a kind of a Japanese beetle, a beetle kind of thing, or a dung beetle. I don't know if you know what a dung beetle is, but it's like a strange insect that sort of makes balls out of poop. Okay? That's really the way it is. I'm just going to tell you like it is. Okay? I don't know how you translate that on the other end, but that's really what a dung beetle does. Okay? And in this desert culture, you can see these beetles moving these large mounds of manure, round pieces of manure, and moving them with their legs. And this was really something. It captivated the Egyptians, and they made a god out of it. And actually this was the god that turned the earth. The dung beetle god, the scarab god, was really the god that sort of moved the earth back and forth where it is. So, okay. So, this is one of the wonders of the world, is you have to think about this. Let's think about this. Okay, to do this pyramid, when you think about this pyramid and the amount of we see this, but if we were to see it, it's square. It's perfectly square on the bottom. Four exact triangles meet at the top. Okay? And it's interesting that these great pyramids that we're looking at here in Cheops, 2.3 million blocks. 2.3 million blocks were used. Okay? And all the blocks, each of them 2.5 tons in weight. 2.3 million blocks carved a certain way to fit exactly so it would go up and also form the chambers that were on the inside. So that tells you something about the Egyptian culture and their mathematical ability. They had certain ways. There was an old movie years ago called In Search of Ancient Astronauts, and they showed how everything lined up. When you look from the sky and you see how the pyramids line up and everything like that, it's like, wow, that's kind of interesting how they do that. It's almost like they're a place that, I wasn't a believer then. I'm thinking that's where the mothership's supposed to land, is take us all away. It's all right. There's an old Neil Young song about a mothership coming to take us all the way to a new place in the sun. And, I was sort of not really a hippie, but listening to that kind of stuff and wondering. And if you watch this thing, you saw these things line up some way. They have some sort of, where is it? Come on back for me. You're gone. Oh, there he is. Okay. They line up somewhere. They have some sort of, from the sky, they have some sort of symmetrical look. So they were, some way they managed this, and there's a pattern here. There's a pattern that's viewed from the sky based on the organization of the structures. Okay? So, we know King Tut, that was that was one of the world's greatest tombs that he was found. He was an 18-year-old, but it was filled with unbelievable treasures, and this is 1922 when they found King Tut's body, and they learned a lot about the mummification process. the process of preserving the body, wrapped in these kinds of spices and these, we've watched the strange Hollywood interpretation of it, but really they would wrap, and they were preserved. They were preserved, and I think they do have one at the Walters Art Museum here in Baltimore. They do have a mummy, or they used to have a mummy there, and you can, you see, it's like there's hair, and it's a person, and they developed this idea. That was why there was such a great outcry from Pharaoh when Moses murdered somebody and buried him in the sand, because not to prepare the body for the place in the tomb was to affect the destiny of because there is this, they believed, particularly in the Egyptian culture, I think from the Egyptian culture, the Egyptian civilization, this is the first one that really had maybe a higher sense. It's the only one that really defines a sense of afterlife for us. We see the Hindu religion and the Buddhist religion, you're supposed to be nothing. But in the Egyptian religion, there is an afterlife. So they are preparing the bodies of their people for the next step. So what does the Egyptian civilization give us that maybe the other civilizations don't offer it? It's the first taste, really, of a pre-Christian sense of an afterlife. They're thinking that there's the river Styx, and you get on the boat and you sail across the river, and you have another life after that, and your wives go with you. You want to get married to Pharaoh? That's good. Better hope he doesn't die before you, because you're going in the grave with him. And that happened. They would put them to sleep, or whatever they would do to them, or maybe bury them alive, and they would be there in case he woke up. Because they really didn't know. That was the other thing. They really did. They knew there was something beyond. They believed desperately in something beyond. And they thought it was something about, the Egyptians really thought, you're going to be known there. You got to have all your stuff with you. You got to have your Lexus and your Cadillac, and you got to have your house and your wives with you, and your servants. They all go in with you. That's some of the extreme cases that happen there, particularly with the pharaohs. The pharaohs got everything buried with them. So, but the idea of preserving this life for the next life, that was their distortion. They're preserving this life. Not that you would get an entirely new life and be like something else in the next life, but you would take everything about this life into the next life, and we've got to save this life of yours for the next one. So that's what you get from studying these kind of things. So let's see. Where are we? Okay. So let's see. Old Kingdom. There's several dynasties. Let's just go through these. You'll read, if you read about ancient Egypt. They describe these numbers of dynasties that move through up to 20, really. In the Old Kingdom, these are the dynasties 3 through 6. This is the Great Sphinx, was maybe built at that time. And he's believed to be a likeness of this man known as, it's K-A-F-R-E. So he was a great pharaoh, and the builders of these, his father, Cheops, was they were the builder of these pyramids, and he was the one. He wanted his to look different, apparently. So we had the Great Sphinx there at Giza. So these were the old kingdoms. Then came the Middle Kingdom, the 11th dynasty, 12th dynasty. These dynasties were established. They had massive public works programs to build. So even more kinds of large cities were built along the Nile during these times. Probably during this era, the family of Jacob moved and settled in Goshen. Now, Goshen is, let's see if we can get there. Goshen is this real fertile area at the very, probably this most fertile area right here near the Suez Canal. This little strip is the Suez Canal now. But right here is where Jacob and his family over here, they were living in Canaan. They did not have food. They came down here. And Pharaoh said, give them the best of the land. And they got the best of the land right in there. That little sort of triangular area, that area right there is where, they started to be, they really were fruitful and multiplied. They came as 70 people. Joseph was already there with his wife and 2 sons. So that's 4. 70 more came down, and Jacob, total of 75. There's a couple of seeming discrepancies in there, but if you add those numbers up the right way, Jacob, 70 family members from his people coming from Canaan here, and then already 4 of his people were already in Egypt. That gives you that number 75. And so in the land of Goshen, that's where they were allowed to land. So they had the most fertile part of the territory. So during this Middle Kingdom, that's probably when they came in there. Now there was this invasion of this group of people, and it might be even similar groups of people. They're called Hyksos. This group, Hyksos. This group of people, they were called shepherd kings. They were like nomads, shepherd kings, but they would organize themselves every now and then and go on these takeovers. And at some point, they managed to take over. Some people say these are the Amalekites. The Amalekites, that's a group of people that King Saul, when we talk about Israel during the last part of the class, King Saul was supposed to eradicate them. But these are probably Amalekites that came over. They were warlike. They were not cultured at all. They were just interested in wine, women, song, and they came in and took over the land during this. They possessed chariots and horses, and the Egyptians really didn't know anything about these things yet. So during this time is when a new king arose, a new king over Egypt, and he founded what's known as the New Kingdom. And he was able to drive the Hyksos out. Now, because the Hyksos were descendants of Shem, they were descendants of Shem, like the people of Jacob were descendants of Shem. This is what led to maybe the enslavement of the people of Israel. This new Pharaoh did not recognize what Joseph had done in saving the civilization. And now that this group of Semitic people came and, invaded them and pushed them out of power, when they were pushed out, then the next time we're not going to let that kind of people dominate us again. So this led to the New Kingdom. During the New Kingdom, they decided we were going to make sure that the Israelites are our slaves. So they became, the slaves and made bricks for all of the building projects that were dotting all over the Nile. So that's how that went there, and so that sets us up. So that the contributions from Egyptian culture is this again this idea of the mathematical kind of calculations. They had honey. It's one thing, honey. They found honey, and someone has eaten honey from one of the tombs, and they developed the production of honey, to a certain point, and they stored it, and they know that honey never decays, which is kind of interesting. It's probably also used in some of their embalming formulas. Let's see, the architecture, the structures, these kind of things, the studying of the skies, and also just the idea of using the river and using its forces for developing food and everything like that. Again, the food supply is again the big thing that made the culture so attractive. this, because of its location, just because of its location, it's always been an important trophy for every kind of invader. Alexander the Great, set up one of his major cities here, Alexandria. It's still a city that exists in Egypt. It was one of his major cities during his empire. And it was there that the New Testament, or the Old Testament, I'm sorry, it was there that the Old Testament was translated into Greek in Alexandria in about, I think 332 BC is when the Greek, 70 Greek scholars translated the Old Testament into the Greek language, and we call that the Septuagint. So that's an important, that's an important thing. This part of the world easily taken over. It doesn't have a lot of natural fortification, and so it has. It was. When the Romans conquered it again, it was a prize for them to have this territory here, where they could go down here and reach India. If you come out, we'll come out a ways. You could go down here and reach over to this far eastern thing, and then you could go this way and cover all of the territory of the northern European area. So that's what made this area, highly prized. So it was invaded again and again. We know the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar came across. He took over Egypt, and he took over Israel, all of this territory. He also took over Egypt and extended his rule pretty much over to this territory here. And that was important there for him also, to control this kind of flow of trade all across here. Lots of money, lots of commerce. All these things were important factors in the development and the the security of the civilization. That's why it was there, why it changed hands, and why it was so contended against. But that makes sense? You okay? All right. Okay, we'll take another break. We have another 10-minute break here. We'll start about 20 after, again, with the last part of our class tonight.